Stewart had not been around all day, having chosen to go off somewhere with his friend, Betty. One afternoon was a mere nothing. Lummox could hold his breath that long, but he knew the signs and understood the situation. John Thomas had reached the size and age when he would spend more and more time with Betty or others like her, and less time with Lummox. Then there would come a fairly long period during which Thomas would spend practically no time with Lummox, but at the end of which there would arrive a new John Thomas, which would presently grow large enough to make an interesting playmate. From experience, Lummox recognized this cycle as necessary and inevitable. Nevertheless, the immediate prospect was excruciatingly boring. He lumbered listlessly around the backyard of the Stewart home, looking for anything. A grasshopper, a robin, anything at all that might be worth looking at. He watched a hill of ants for a while. They seemed to be moving house. An endless chain was dragging little white grubs in one direction, while a counter-marching line returned for more grubs. This killed half an hour. Growing tired of ants, he moved away toward his own house. His number 7 foot came down on the anthill and crushed it, but the fact did not come to his attention. His own house was just big enough for him to back into it, and was the end building of a row of decreasing size. The one at the far end would have made a suitable doghouse for a chihuahua. Piled outside his shed were 6 bales of hay. Lummox pulled a small amount off one bale and chewed it lazily. He did not take a second bite because he had taken as much as he thought he could steal and not have it noticed. There was nothing to stop him from eating the entire pile, except the knowledge that John Thomas would bawl him out bitterly, and might even refuse for a week or more to scratch him with the garden rake. The household rules required Lummox not to touch food other than natural forage until it was placed in his manager. Lummox usually obeyed, as he hated dissension and was humiliated by disapproval. Besides, he did not want hay. He had had hay for supper last night. He would have it again tonight and again tomorrow night. Lummox wanted something with more body and a more interesting flavor. He ambled over to the low fence, which separated the several acres of backyard from Mrs. Stewart's formal garden, stuck his head over and looked longingly at Mrs. Stewart's roses. The fence was merely a symbol, marking the line he must not cross. Lummox had crossed it once, a few years earlier, and had sampled the rose bushes. Just a sample, a mere appetizer, but Mrs. Stewart had made such a fuss that he hated to think about it even now. Shuddering at the recollection, he backed hastily away from the fence. But he recalled some rose bushes that did not belong to Mrs. Stewart, and therefore, in Lummox's opinion, did not belong to anybody. They were in the garden of the Donahues, next door west. There was a possible way, which Lummox had been thinking about lately, to reach these ownerless rose bushes. The Stewart place was surrounded by a 10-foot concrete wall. Lummox had never tried to climb over it, although he had nibbled the top of it in places. In the rear, there was one break in it, where the gully draining the land crossed the property line. The gap in the wall was filled by a massive grating of 8x8 timbers, bolted together with extremely heavy bolts. The vertical timbers were set in the stream bed, and the contractor who had erected it had assured Mrs. Stewart that it would stop Lummox, or a herd of elephants, or anything else too big-hipped to crawl between the timbers. Lummox knew that the contractor was mistaken, but his opinion had not been asked, and he had not offered it. John Thomas had not expressed an opinion either, but he had seemed to suspect the truth. He had emphatically ordered Lummox not to tear the grating down. Lummox had obeyed. He had sampled it for flavor, but the wooden timbers had been soaked in something which gave them a really unbearable taste. He let them be. But Lummox felt no responsibility for natural forces. He had noticed about 3 months back that spring rains had eroded the gully so that 2 of the vertical timbers were no longer embedded but were merely resting on the dry stream bed. Lummox had been thinking about this for several weeks and had found that a gentle nudge tended to spread the timbers at the bottom. A slightly heavier nudge might open up a space wide enough without actually tearing down the grating. Lummox lumbered down to check up. Still more of the stream bed had washed away in the last rain. One of the vertical timbers hung a few inches free of the sand. The one next to it was barely resting on the ground. Lummox smiled like a simple-minded gollywog and carefully, delicately insinuated his head between the two big posts. He pushed gently. Above his head came a sound of rending wood, and the pressure suddenly relieved. Startled, Lummox pulled his head out and looked up. The upper end of one 8x8 had torn free of its bolts. It pivoted now on a lower horizontal girder. Lummox clucked to himself. Too bad, but it couldn't be helped. Lummox was not one to weep over past events. What has been must be. No doubt John Thomas would be vexed. But in the meantime, here was an opening through the grating. He lowered his head like a football linesman, set himself in low gear, and pushed on through. There followed several sounds of protesting and rending wood, and sharper ones of broken bolts, but Lummox ignored it all. He was on the far side now, a free agent. He paused and raised up like a caterpillar, lifting legs 1 and 3, 2 and 4 off the ground, and looked around. It was certainly nice to be outside. He wondered why he had not done it sooner. It had been a long time since John Thomas had taken him out, even for a short walk. He was still looking around, sniffing free air, when an unfriendly character charged at him, yapping and barking furiously. Lummox recognized him, an oversized and heavily muscled mastiff that ran ownerless and free in the neighborhood. They had often exchanged insults through the grating. Lummox had nothing against dogs. In the course of his long career with the Stewart family, he had known several socially, and had found them pretty fair company in the absence of John Thomas. But this mastiff was another matter. He fancied himself boss of the neighborhood, bullied other dogs, terrorized cats, and repeatedly challenged Lummox to come out and fight like a dog. Nevertheless, Lummox smiled at him, opened his mouth wide, and in a lisping, baby girl voice from somewhere far back inside him, called the mastiff a very bad name. The dog gasped. It is likely that he did not comprehend what Lummox had said, but he did know that he had been insulted. He recovered himself and renewed the attack, barking louder than ever and raising an unholy ruckus, while dashing around Lummox and making swift sorties at his flanks to nip at Lummox's legs. Lummox remained reared up, watching the dog but making no move. He did add to his earlier remark a truthful statement about the dog's ancestry and an untruthful one about his habits. They helped to keep the mastiff berserk. But on the dog's 7th round trip, he got fairly close to where Lummox's first pair of legs would have been had Lummox had all 8 feet on the ground. Lummox ducked his head the way a frog strikes at a fly. His mouth opened like a wardrobe trunk and gobbled the mastiff. Not bad, Lummox decided as he chewed and swallowed. Not bad at all. And the collar made a crunchy tidbit. He considered whether or not to go back through the grating, now that he had had a little snack, and pretend that he had never been outside at all. However, there were still those ownerless rose bushes, and no doubt John Thomas would make it inconvenient for him to get out again soon. He ambled away parallel to the Stewart's rear wall, then swung around the end onto the Donahue land. John Thomas Stewart the 11th got home shortly before dinner time, having already dropped Betty Sorensen at her home. He noticed as he landed that Lummox was not in sight, but he assumed that his pet was in his shed. His mind was not on Lummox, but on the age-old fact that females do not operate by logic, at least as logic is understood by males. He was planning to enter Western Tech. Betty wanted them both to attend the state university. He had pointed out that he could not get the courses he wanted at State U. Betty had insisted that he could, and had looked at references to prove her point. He had rebutted by saying that it was not the name of a course that mattered, but who taught it. The discussion had fallen to pieces when she had refused to concede that he was an authority. He had absent-mindedly unstrapped his harness copter while dwelling on the illogic of the feminine mind, and was racking it in the hallway when his mother burst into his presence. "John Thomas, where have you been?" He tried to think what he could have slipped on now. It was a bad sign when she called him John Thomas. John or Johnny was okay, or even Johnny Boy, but John Thomas usually meant that he had been accused, tried, and convicted in absentia. "Huh? Why, I told you at lunch, Mum. Out hopping with Betty. We flew over to... Never mind that. Do you know what that beast has done?" Now he had it. Lummox. He hoped it wasn't Mum's garden. Maybe Lum had just knocked over his own house again. If so, Mum would level off presently. Maybe he had better build a new one, bigger. "What's the trouble?" he asked cautiously. "What's the trouble? What isn't the trouble? John Thomas, this time you simply will have to get rid of it. This is the last straw." "Take it easy, Mum," he said hastily. "We can't get rid of Lum. You promised Dad." She made no direct answer. With the police calling every 10 minutes, and that great dangerous beast rampaging around, and... Wait a minute, Mum. Lum isn't dangerous. He's gentle as a kitten. What happened? Everything. He gradually drew out of her some of the details. Lummox had gone for a stroll. That much was clear. John Thomas hoped without conviction that Lummox had not got any iron or steel while he was out. Iron had such an explosive effect on his metabolism. There was the time Lummox had eaten that second-hand Buick. His thoughts were interrupted by his mother's words, and Mrs. Donahue was simply furious, and well she might be. Her prize roses. Oh, that was bad. He tried to recall the exact amount in his savings account. He would have to apologize to, and think of ways to butter up the old biddy. In the meantime, he would beat Lummox's ears with an axe. Lummox knew about roses. There was no excuse. "Look, Mum, I'm awfully sorry. I'll go right out and pound some sense into his thick head. When I get through with him, he won't dare sneeze without permission." John Thomas started edging around her. "Where are you going?" she demanded. Out to talk with Lum, of course. When I get through with him, don't be silly. He isn't here." Where is he?" John Thomas swiftly rearranged his prayers to hope that Lummox hadn't found very much iron. The Buick hadn't really been Lummox's fault, and anyhow, it had belonged to John Thomas. But no telling where he is now. Chief Dreiser said the police are after Lummox. "You can just bet they are, young man. The entire safety patrol is after him. Mr. Dreiser wanted me to come downtown and take him home, but I told him we would have to get you to handle that beast." "But Mother, Lummox would have obeyed you. He always does. Why did Mr. Dreiser take him downtown? He knows Lum belongs here. Being taken downtown would frighten Lum. The poor baby is timid. He wouldn't like... Poor baby indeed. He wasn't taken downtown." "But you said he was." "I said no such thing. If you'll be quiet, I'll tell you what happened." It appeared that Mrs. Donahue had surprised Lummox when he had eaten only 4 or 5 of her rose bushes. With much courage and little sense, she had run at him with a broom, to scream and belabor him about the head. She had not followed the mastiff, though he could have managed her with one gulp. Lummox had a sense of propriety as nice as that of any house cat. People were not food. In fact, people were almost invariably friendly. So his feelings were hurt. He had lumbered away from there, pouting. The next action report on Lummox was for a point 2 miles away and about 30 minutes later. The Stewarts lived in a suburban area of Westville. Open country separated it from the main part of town. Mr. Ito had a small farm in this interval, where he hand-raised vegetables for the tables of gourmets. Mr. Ito apparently had not known what it was that he had found pulling up his cabbages and gulping them down. Lummox's long residence in the vicinity was certainly no secret, but Mr. Ito had no interest in other people's business and had never seen Lummox before. But he showed no more hesitation than had Mrs. Donahue. He dashed into his house and came out with a gun that had been handed down to him from his grandfather, a relic of the Fourth World War of the sort known affectionately as a tank killer. Mr. Ito steadied the gun on a potting bench and let Lummox have it where he would have sat down had Lummox been constructed for such. The noise scared Mr. Ito. He had never heard the weapon fired, and the flash momentarily blinded him. When he blinked his eyes and recovered, the thing had gone. But it was easy to tell the direction in which it had gone. This encounter had not humiliated Lummox, as had the brush with Mrs. Donahue. This frightened him almost out of his wits. While busy with his fresh green salad, he had been faced toward a triplet of Mr. Ito's greenhouses. When the explosion ticked him, and the blast assailed his hearing, Lummox shifted into high gear and got underway in the direction he was heading. Ordinarily, he used a leg-firing order of 1, 4, 5, 8, 2, 3, 6, 7, and repeat, good for speeds from a slow crawl to fast as a trotting horse. He now broke from a standing start into a double-ended gallop, moving legs 1 and 2, and 5 and 6 together, alternated with 3 and 4, and 7 and 8. Lummox was through the 3 greenhouses before he had time to notice them, leaving a tunnel suitable for a medium truck. Straight ahead, 3 miles away, lay downtown Westville. It might have been better if he had been headed in the opposite direction toward the mountains. John Thomas Stewart listened to his mother's confused account with growing apprehension. When he heard about Mr. Ito's greenhouses, he stopped thinking about his savings account and started wondering what assets he could convert into cash. His jump harness was almost new, but shucks, it wouldn't pay the damage. He wondered if there was any kind of a dicker who could work with the bank. The one sure thing, Mom wouldn't help him out, not the state she was in. Later reports were spotty. Lummox seemed to have gone across country until he hit the highway leading into town. A transcontinental trucker had complained to a traffic officer over a cup of coffee that he had just seen a robot peta truck with no license plate and that the darned thing had been paying no attention to traffic lanes. But the trucker had used it as an excuse to launch a diatribe about the danger of robot drivers and how there was no substitute for a human driver, sitting in the cab and keeping his eyes open for emergencies. The traffic patrolman had not seen Lummox, being already at his coffee when Lummox passed, and had not been impressed since the trucker was obviously prejudiced. Nevertheless, he had phoned in. Traffic Control Center in Westville paid no attention to the report. Control was fully occupied with a reign of terror. John Thomas interrupted his mother. Has anybody been hurt? Hurt? I don't know. Probably. John Thomas, you've got to get rid of that beast at once. He ignored that statement. It seemed the wrong time to argue it. What else happened? Mrs. Stewart did not know in detail. Near the middle of town, Lummox came down a local chute from the overhead freeway. He was moving slowly now, and with hesitation. Traffic and large numbers of people confused him. He stepped off the street onto a sidewalk. The walk ground to a stop, not being designed for 6 tons of concentrated load. Fuses had blown, circuit breakers had opened, and pedestrian traffic at the busiest time of day was thrown into confusion for 20 blocks of the shopping district. Women had screamed, children and dogs had added to the excitement. Safety officers had tried to restore order, and poor Lummox, who had not meant any harm and had not intended to visit the shopping district anyway, made a perfectly natural mistake. The big display windows of the Bon Marché looked like a refuge where he could get away from it all. The duraglass of the windows was supposed to be unbreakable, but the architect had not counted on Lummox mistaking it for empty air. Lummox went in and tried to hide in a model bedroom display. He was not very successful. John Thomas's next question was cut short by a thump on the roof. Someone had landed. He looked up. "You expecting anyone, Mum?" "It's probably the police. They said they would." "The police? Oh my. Don't go away. You've got to see them." "I wasn't going anywhere," he answered miserably, and punched a button to unlock the roof entrance. Moments later, the lazy lift from the roof creaked to a stop, and the door opened. A safety sergeant and a patrolman stepped out. "Mrs. Stewart," the sergeant began formally. "In your service, ma'am." He caught sight of John Thomas, who was trying not to be noticed. "Are you John T. Stewart?" John gulped. "Yes, sir." "And come along right away?" "Excuse us, ma'am. Or do you want to come too?" "Me? Oh no, I'd just be in the way." The sergeant nodded relieved agreement. "Yes, ma'am." "Come along, youngster. Minutes count." He took John by the arm. John tried to shrug away. "Hey, what is this? You got a warrant or something?" The police officer stopped, seemed to count 10, then said slowly, "Son, I do not have a warrant. But if you are the John T. Stewart I'm looking for, and I know you are, then unless you want something drastic and final to happen to that deep space, what is it you've been harboring, you'd better snap to and come with us." "Oh, I'll come," John said hastily. "Okay, don't give me any more trouble." John Thomas Stewart kept quiet and went with him. In the 3 minutes it took the patrol car to fly downtown, John Thomas tried to find out the worst. Mr. Patrol Officer, there hasn't been anybody hurt, has there?" "Sergeant Mendoza," the sergeant answered. "I hope not. I don't know." John considered this bleak answer. "Well, Lummox is still in the Bon Marché." "Is that what you call it?" "Lummox. Doesn't seem strong enough." "No, we got it out of there. It's under the West Arroyo Viaduct." "I hope." The answer sounded ominous. "What do you mean, you hope?" "Well, first we blocked off Main and Hamilton, then we shimmied it out of the store with fire extinguishers. Nothing else seemed to bother it. Solid slugs just bounced off." "Say, what's that beast's hide made of? 10-point steel?" Not exactly." Sergeant Mendoza's satire was closer to fact than John Thomas cared to discuss. He still was wondering if Lummox had eaten any iron. After the mishap of the digested Buick, Lummox's growth had taken an enormous spurt. In 2 weeks he had jumped from the size of a misshapen hippopotamus to his present unlikely dimensions, more growth than he had shown in the preceding generation. It had made him extremely gaunt, like a canvas tarpaulin draped over a scaffolding, his quite unearthly skeleton pushing through his skin. It had taken 3 years of a high-caloric diet to make him chubby again. Since that time, John Thomas had tried to keep metal away from Lummox, most especially iron, even though his father and his grandfather had always fed him tidbits of scrap metal. Anyhow, the fire extinguishers dug him out. Only he sneezed and knocked 2 men down. After that we used more fire extinguishers to turn him down Hamilton, meaning to herd him into open country where he couldn't do so much damage. Seeing as how we couldn't find you, we were making out pretty well, with only an occasional lamppost knocked down, or ground car stepped on or such. And when we came to where we meant to turn him off on Hillcrest and head him back to your place. But he got away from us and headed out onto the viaduct, ran into the guardrail and went off, and, well, you'll see right now. Here we are. Half a dozen police cars were hovering over the end of the viaduct. Surrounding the area were many private air cars and an Airbus or two. The patrol cars were keeping them back from the scene. There were several hundred harness flyers as well, darting like bats in and out among the vehicles and making the police problem more difficult. On the ground, a few regular police, supplemented by emergency safety officers wearing armbands, were trying to hold the crowd back and were diverting traffic away from the viaduct and from the freight road that ran under it down the arroyo. Sergeant Mendoza's driver threaded his way through the cars in the air while speaking into a hushaphone on his chest. Chief Dreiser's bright red command car detached itself from the knot over the end of the viaduct and approached them. Both cars stopped a few yards apart and 100 feet above the viaduct. John Thomas could see the big gap in the railing where Lummox had gone over, but could not see Lummox himself. The viaduct blocked his view. The door of the command car opened, and Chief Dreiser leaned out. He looked harassed, and his bald head was covered with sweat. "Tell the steward boy to stick his head out." John Thomas ran a window down and did so. "Here, sir." "Lad, can you control that monster?" "Certainly, sir." "I hope you're right." Mendoza landed. "Let him try it." "Yes, Chief." Mendoza spoke to the driver, who moved the car past the viaduct and started letting down beyond it. Lummox could be seen then. He had taken refuge under the end of the bridge, making himself small. For him. John Thomas leaned out and called to him. Lummy boy, come to Papa." The creature stirred, and the end of the viaduct stirred with him. About 12 feet of his front end emerged from under the structure, and he looked around wildly. "Here, up here." Lummox caught sight of his friend and split his head in an idiot grin. Sergeant Mendoza snapped. "Put her down, sluts. Let's get this over." The driver lowered a bit and then said anxiously, "That's enough, Sergeant. I saw that critter rear up earlier." All right. Mendoza opened the door and kicked out a rope ladder used in rescue work. "Can you go down that, son?" "Sure." With Mendoza to give him a hand, John Thomas shinned out of the door and got a grip on the ladder. He felt his way down and came to the point where there was no more ladder. He was still 6 feet above Lummox's head. He looked down. "Heads up, baby. Take me down." Lummox lifted another pair of legs from the ground and carefully placed his broad skull under John Thomas, who stepped onto it, staggering a little and grabbing for a handhold. Lummox lowered him gently to the ground. John Thomas jumped off and turned to face him. Well, the fall apparently had not hurt Lum any. That was a relief. He would get him home first, and then go over him inch by inch. In the meantime, Lummox was nuzzling his legs and making a sound remarkably like a purr. John looked stern. "Bad, Lummy. Bad, Lummy. You're a mess, aren't you?" Lummox looked embarrassed. He lowered his head to the ground, looked up at his friend, and opened his mouth wide. "I didn't mean to," he protested in his baby girl voice. "You didn't mean to. You didn't mean to. Oh no, you never do. I'm going to take your front feet and stuff them down your throat. You know that, don't you? I'm going to beat you to a pulp and then use you for a rug. No supper for you. You didn't mean to, indeed." The bright red car came close and hovered. "Okay?" demanded Chief Dreiser. "Sure. All right, here's the plan. I'm going to move that barrier up ahead. You get him back up on Hillcrest, going out the upper end of the draw. There will be an escort waiting. You fall in behind and stay with it all the way home. Get me?" "Okay." John Thomas saw that in both directions the Arroyo Road had been blocked with riot shields, tractors with heavy armor mounted on their fronts, so that a temporary barrier could be thrown across a street or square. Such equipment was standard for any city safety force since the riots of '91, but he could not recall that Westville had ever used them. He began to realize that the day that Lummox went to town would not soon be forgotten. But he was happy that Lummox had been too timid to munch on those steel shields. He was beginning to hope that his pet had been too busy all afternoon to eat any ferrous metal. He turned back to him. "All right, get your ugly carcass out of that hole. We're going home." Lummox complied eagerly. The viaduct again trembled as he brushed against it. "Make me a saddle." Lummox's midsection slumped down a couple of feet. He thought about it very hard, and his upper surface shaped itself into contours resembling a chair. "Hold still," John Thomas ordered. "I don't want any mashed fingers." Lummox did so, quivering a little, and the young man scrambled up, grabbing at slip folds in Lummox's durable hide. He sat himself like a Raja, ready for a tiger hunt. "All right. Slow march now, up the road. No, no. Gee around, you numbskull. Uphill, not down." Docilely, Lummox turned and ambled away. 2 patrol ground cars led the way. 2 others brought up the rear. Chief Dreiser's tomato-red runabout hung over them at a safe distance. John Thomas lounged back and spent the time composing first what he was going to say to Lummox, and second what he was going to say to his mother. The first speech was much easier. He kept going back and embellishing it with fresh adjectives whenever he found himself running into snags on the second. They were halfway home when a single flyer, hopping free in a copter harness, approached the little parade. The flyer ignored the red warning light stabbing out from the police chief's car and slanted straight down at the huge star beast. John Thomas thought that he recognized Betty's slapdash style even before he could make out features. He was not mistaken. He caught her as she cut power. Chief Dreiser slammed the window open and stuck his head out. He was in full flow when Betty interrupted him. "Why, Chief Dreiser, what a terrible way to talk." He stopped and took another look. "Is that Betty Sorensen?" "Of course it is. And I must say, Chief, that after all the years you've taught Sunday school, I never thought I would live to hear you use such language. If that is setting a good example, I think I'll, young lady, hold your tongue." "Me? But you were the one who was using." "Quiet. I've had all I can take today. You get that suit to buzzing and hop out of here. This is official business. Now get out." She glanced at John Thomas and winked, then set her face in cherubic innocence. "But Chief, I can't." "Huh? Why not?" "I'm out of juice. This was an emergency landing." "Betty, you quit fibbing to me." "Me? Fibbing? Why, Deacon Dreiser, I'll deacon you. If your tanks are dry, get down off that beast and walk home. He's dangerous." "Lummy dangerous? Lummy wouldn't hurt a fly. And besides, do you want me to walk home alone on a country road when it's almost dark? I'm surprised at you." Dreiser sputtered and closed the window. Betty wiggled out of her harness and settled back in the wider seat that Lummox had provided without being told. John Thomas looked at her. "Hi, Slugger. Hi, Knothead. I didn't know you knew the chief. I know everybody. Now shut up. I've gotten here with all speed and much inconvenience as soon as I heard the newscast. You and Lummox between you could not manage to think your way out of this, even with Lummox doing most of the work, so I rallied around. Now give me the grisly details. Don't hold anything back from Mama. Smart Alec. Don't waste time on compliments. This will probably be our only chance for a private word before they start worrying you, so you had better talk fast. Huh? What do you think you are, a lawyer? I'm better than a lawyer. My mind is not cluttered with stale precedents. I can be creative about it. Well, actually he felt better now that Betty was present. It was no longer just Lummox and himself against an unfriendly world. He poured out the story while she listened soberly. Anybody hurt? She asked at last. I don't think so. At least they didn't mention it. They would have. She sat up straight. Then we've got nothing to worry about. What? With hundreds, maybe thousands in damage? I'd like to know what you call trouble. People getting hurt, she answered. Anything else can be managed. Maybe we'll have Lummox go through bankruptcy. Huh? That's silly. If you think that is silly, you've never been in a law court. Have you? Don't change the subject. After all, Lummox was attacked with a deadly weapon. It didn't hurt him, it just singed him a little. Beside the point, it undoubtedly caused him great mental anguish. I'm not sure he was responsible for anything that happened afterwards. Be quiet and let me think. Do you mind if I think too? Not as long as I don't hear the gears grind. Now pipe down. The parade continued to the Stewart home in silence. Betty gave him one piece of advice as they stopped. Admit nothing. Nothing. And don't sign anything. Holler if you need me. Mrs. Stewart did not come out to meet them. Chief Dreiser inspected the gap in the grating with John Thomas, with Lummox hanging over their shoulders. The chief watched in silence as John Thomas took a string and tied it across the opening. There. Now he can't get out again. Dreiser pulled at his lip. Son, are you all right in the head? You don't understand, sir. The grating wouldn't stop him, even if we did repair it. Not if he wanted to get out. I don't know anything that would. But that string will. Lummox. Yes, Johnny. See that string? Yes, Johnny. You bust that string and I'll bust your silly head. Understand me? Yes, Johnny. You won't go out of the yard again. Not ever, unless I take you. All right, Johnny. Promise. Cross your heart. Cross my heart. He hasn't really got a heart, Johnny went on. He has an uncentralized circulatory system. It's like, I don't care if he has rotary pumps, as long as he stays home. But he will. He's never broken cross my heart, even if he hasn't got one. Dreiser chewed his thumb. All right. I'll leave a man out here with a portophone tonight, and tomorrow we'll put some steel I-beams in there in place of that wood. John started to say, oh, not steel, but he thought better of it. Dreiser said, what's the matter? Nothing. You'll keep an eye on him, too. He won't get out. He had better not. You realize that you are both under arrest, don't you? But I've got no way to lock that monstrosity up. John Thomas did not answer. He had not realized it. Now he saw that it was inevitable. Dreiser went on in a kindly voice. Try not to worry about it. You seem like a good boy, and everybody thought well of your father. Now I've got to go in and have a word with your mother. You had better stay here until my man arrives, and then maybe sort of introduce him to, this thing. He passed a doubtful eye over Lummox. John Thomas stayed while the police chief went back to the house. Now was the time to give Lummox what for, but he did not have the heart for it. Not just then. 2. The Department of Spatial Affairs. To John Thomas Stewart, the 11th, the troubles of himself and Lummox seemed unique and unbearable, yet he was not alone, even around Westville. Little Mr. Ito was suffering from an always fatal disease, old age. It would kill him soon. Behind uncounted closed doors in Westville, other persons suffered silently the countless forms of quiet desperation which can close in on a man or woman for reasons of money, family, health, or face. Farther away in the state capitol, the governor stared hopelessly at a stack of papers, evidence that would certainly send to prison his oldest and most trusted friend. Much farther away on Mars, a prospector abandoned his wrecked sandmobile and got ready to attempt the long trek back to Outpost. He would never make it. Incredibly farther away, 27 light years, the starship Bolivar was entering an interspatial transition. A flaw in a tiny relay would cause that relay to operate a tenth of a second later than it should. The SS Bolivar would wander between the stars for many years, but she would never find her way home. Inconceivably farther from Earth, halfway across the local star cloud, a race of arboreal crustaceans was slowly losing to a younger, more aggressive race of amphibians. It would be several thousand Earth years before the crustaceans were extinct, but the issue was not in doubt. This was regrettable by human standards, for the crustacean race had mental and spiritual abilities which complemented human traits in a fashion that would have permitted a wealth of civilized cooperation with them. But when the first Earth humans landed there, some 11,000 years in the future, the crustaceans would be long dead. Back on Earth at Federation Capital, His Excellency the Right Honorable Henry Gladstone Kiku, M.A. Oxon, Lit D. Honoris Causa, Cape Town, OBE, Permanent Undersecretary for Spatial Affairs, was not worried about the doomed crustaceans because he would never know of them. He was not yet worried about SS Bolivar, but he would be. Aside from the ship, the loss of one passenger in that ship would cause a chain reaction of headaches for Mr. Kiku and all his associates for years to come. Anything and everything outside Earth's ionosphere was Mr. Kiku's responsibility and worry. Anything which concerned the relationships between Earth and any part of the explored universe was also his responsibility. Even affairs which were superficially, strictly Earth-side, were also his concern, if they affected or were in any way affected by anything that was extraterrestrial, interplanetary, or interstellar in nature, a very wide range indeed. His problems included such things as the importation of Martian sandgrass, suitably mutated for the Tibetan Plateau. Mr. Kiku's office had not approved that until after a careful mathematical examination of the possible effect on the Australian sheep industry and a dozen other factors. Such things were done cautiously, with the gruesome example of Madagascar and the Martian berry root always before them. Economic decisions did not upset Mr. Kiku, no matter how many toes he stepped on. Other sorts kept him awake nights, such as his decision not to give police escorts to Goddard Exchange students from Procyon 7, despite the very real danger to them from provincial Earthmen with prejudices against beings having unearthly arrangements of limbs or eyes or such. The cephalopods of that planet were a touchy people, and something very like a police escort was their own usual punishment for criminals. Mr. Kiku had an extremely large staff to help him, of course, and also, of course, the help of the secretary himself. The secretary made speeches, greeted very important visitors, gave out interviews, and in many other ways eased for Mr. Kiku an otherwise unbearable load. Mr. Kiku would be first to admit this. As long as the current secretary behaved himself, minded his business, took care of public appearances, and let the undersecretary get on with the department's work, he had Mr. Kiku's approval. Of course, if he failed to pull his load or threw his weight around, Mr. Kiku was capable of finding ways to get rid of him. But it had been 15 years since he had found it necessary to be so drastic, Even the rawest political appointee could usually be broken to harness. Mr. Kiku had not made up his mind about the current secretary, but was not now thinking about him. Instead, he was looking over the top-sheet synopsis for Project Cerberus, a power proposal for the research station on Pluto. A reminder light on his desk flashed, and he looked up to see the door between his office and that of the secretary dilate. The secretary walked in, whistling "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Mr. Kiku did not recognize the tune. He broke off. "Greetings, Henry." "No, don't get up." Mr. Kiku had not started to get up. "How do you do, Mr. Secretary? What can I do for you?" Nothing much. He paused by Mr. Kiku's desk and picked up the project folder. "What are you swatting now?" "Cerberus, eh?" "Henry, that's an engineering matter. Why should we worry about it?" "There are aspects," Mr. Kiku answered carefully, "that concern us." "I suppose so. Budget and so forth." His eyes sought the bold-faced line reading, estimated cost 3.5 megabucks and 7.4 lives. "What's this?" "I can't go before the council and ask them to approve this. It's fantastic." The first estimate, Mr. Kiku said evenly, was over 8 megabucks and more than 100 lives. "I don't mind the money, but this other. You are in effect asking the council to sign death warrants for 7 4/10 men. You can't do that. It isn't human." "Say, what the deuce is 4/10 of a man anyway? How can you kill a fraction of a man?" "Mr. Secretary," his subordinate answered patiently, "any project bigger than a schoolyard swing involves probable loss of life. But that hazard factor is low. It means that working on Project Cerberus will be safer on the average than staying Earthside. That's my rule of thumb." "Hey," the secretary looked again at the synopsis. "Then why not say so? Put the thing in the best light and so forth." "This report is for my eyes. For our eyes only. The report to the council will emphasize safety precautions and will not include an estimate of deaths, which, after all, is a guess." A guess. Yes, of course." The secretary put the report down, seemed to lose interest. "Anything else, sir?" "Oh, yes. Henry, old man, you know that Rargilian dignitary I'm supposed to receive today? Dr. what's his name?" "Dr. Ftamel." Mr. Kiku glanced at his desk control panel. "Your appointment is, 1 hour and 7 minutes from now." "That's just it. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to substitute. Apologies to him and so forth. Tell him I'm tied up with affairs of state." "Sir, I wouldn't advise that. He will expect to be received by an official of your rank, and the Rargilians are extremely meticulous about protocol. Oh, come now, this native won't know the difference." "But he will, sir." "Well, let him think that you're me. I don't care. But I won't be here, and that's that. The Secretary General has invited me to go to the ball game with him, and an invitation from the SG is a must, you know." Mr. Kiku knew that it was nothing of the sort, had the commitment been explained. But he shut up. "Very well, sir." "Thanks, old chap." The secretary left again, whistling. When the door closed, Mr. Kiku, with an angry gesture, slapped a row of switches on the desk panel. He was locked in now, and could not be reached by phone, video, tube, auto-writer, or any other means, save by an alarm button which his own secretary had used only once in 12 years. He leaned elbows on his desk, covered his head with his hands, and rubbed his fingers through his woolly pate. This trouble, that trouble, the other trouble, and always some moron to jiggle his elbow. Why had he ever left Africa? Where came this itch for public service, an itch that had long since turned into mere habit? He sat up and opened his middle drawer. It was bulging with real estate prospectuses from Kenya. He took out a handful and soon was comparing relative merits of farms. Now here was a little honey if a man had the price. Better than 800 acres, half of it in cultivation, and 7 proved wells on the property. He looked at map and photographs and presently felt better. After a while he put them away and closed the drawer. He was forced to admit that, while what he had told the chief was true, his own nervous reaction came mostly from his lifelong fear of snakes. If Dr. Ftamel were anything but a Rargylian, or if the Rargylians had not been Medusa humanoids, he wouldn't have minded. Of course, he knew that those tentacles growing out of a Rargylian's head were not snakes, but his stomach didn't know it. He would have to find time for a hypnotic treatment before... No, that wasn't time. He'd have to take a pill instead. Sighing, he flipped the switches back on. His incoming basket started to fill up at once, and all the communication instruments showed lights. But the lights were amber rather than blinking red. He ignored them and glanced through the stuff falling into his basket. Most of the items were for his information only. Under doctrine, his subordinates or their subordinates had taken action. Occasionally, he would check a name and a suggested action and drop the sheet in the gaping mouth of the outgoing basket. A radio type came in that was not routine, in that it concerned a creature alleged to be extraterrestrial but unclassified as to type and origin. The incident involved seemed unimportant, some nonsense in one of the native villages in the western part of the continent. But the factor of an extraterrestrial creature automatically required the local police to report it to Spatial Affairs, and the lack of classification of the ET prevented action under doctrine and resulted in the report being kicked upstairs. Mr. Kiku had never seen Lummox, and would have had no special interest if he had. But Mr. Kiku knew that each contact with out there was unique. The universe was limitless in its variety. To assume without knowledge, to reason by analogy, to take the unknown for granted, all meant to invite disaster. Mr. Kiku looked over his list to see whom he could send. Any of his career officers could act as a court of original and super jurisdiction in any case involving extraterrestrials, but who was on Earth and free? Sergei Greenberg, that was the man. System Trade Intelligence could get along without a chief for a day or two. He flipped a switch. Sergei? Yes, boss. Busy? Well, yes and no. I'm paring my nails and trying to figure a reason why the taxpayers should pay me more money. Should they now? I'm sending a blue sheet down. Mr. Kiku checked Greenberg's name on the radio type, dropped it in his outgoing basket, waited a few seconds until he saw Greenberg pick it out of his own incoming basket. Read it. Greenberg did so, then looked up. Well, boss, from the local justice that we are assuming tentative jurisdiction, then buzz out and look into it. Thy wish is my command, O king. Even Money the Critter is terrestrial after all. 2 to 1, I can identify if it isn't. No wager, not at those odds. You're probably right, but it might be a special situation. We can't take chances. I'll keep the local yokels in line, boss. Where is this hamlet? Westville, or whatever it is. How would I know? You have the sheet in front of you. Greenberg glanced at it. Hey, what do you know? It's in the mountains. This may take 2 or 3 weeks, boss. Hot enough for you? Take more than 3 days and I'll charge it off your annual leave. Mr. Kiku switched off and turned to other matters. He disposed of a dozen calls, found the bottom of his incoming basket and lost it again. Then noticed that it was time for the Rargyllian. Goose flesh crawled over him, and he dug hastily into his desk for one of the special pills his doctor had warned him not to take too frequently. He had just gulped it when his secretary's light started blinking. Sir, Dr. Ftumble is here. Show him in. Mr. Kiku muttered in a language his ancestors had used in making magic, against snakes, for example. As the door dilated, he hung on his face the expression suitable for receiving visitors. 3. An improper question. The intervention by the Department of Spatial Affairs in the case of Lummox did not postpone the hearing. It speeded it up. Mr. Greenberg phoned the district judge, asked